Okay guys, so today I want to talk about the most important numbers and math in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm going to boil this down in a very simple way that'll give you a couple different useful rules of thumb to think about how to deck build, what makes a deck good, and when a deck has potential even if it isn't good right now. I'm going to compare Malice to White Forest to illustrate some strong examples of these most important numbers in Yu-Gi-Oh! And let me know in the comments if there's anything that I missed. Okay, so let's begin. Probably the most basic number in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the number 3. The number 3 is the number of cards of the same name that you can play in any deck unless they are touched by the ban list. So let's begin here. I'll show you how the probability calculator works and why you should be using this every single time you deck build, and then we can talk about broader ideas around deck building, like how many cards in your deck should you be playing, the difference between 40 and 60, the difference between playing 1 or 3 of a card, the difference between having, 8 versus 12 or 15 or 20 engine cards slash extenders, and how much non-engine you should be playing. Okay, so first of all, let's take a look at our probability calculator here. This is very simple. So the number 40 is going to be the number of cards in our deck. We're keeping that like that for just simplicity's sake. We're playing 40 cards in our Malice deck, so we have 40 cards right here. Our sample size is 5. That is the number of cards in our opening hand, and for simplicity's sake, we're going first, or we just haven't drawn yet, so we have 5 cards in our hand. Now let's take a look at if we have 3 cards. Let's talk about Dormouse for a second, the best starter in Malice. So when this card was at 3, or when any card is at 3, you have a 33% chance of drawing at least one of this card in every single opening hand. Now, obviously, when you are building a deck, you don't have only 3 engine cards in your entire deck. But when you're thinking about how many copies of a card to play, playing 3 of a card means you want to draw the card. Otherwise, you wouldn't be playing 3 copies of it, the maximum number of copies. If you move Dormouse from 3 to 2 copies, the chance of you drawing at least one of it drops from 34% to 24%. That may not seem like a large difference overall in terms of the absolute difference. It's only like a 10-ish% drop. But it actually is substantial over the course of like 10 games that in maybe 3 out of those 10 games, you're going to draw Dormouse versus 2 in 10 games. So now let's scale this up a little bit and talk about what is more realistic. What numbers should you actually be thinking about when you build a deck? So let's start with the pure starters of Malice. Here, Malice has 2 Dormouse, 2 White Rabbit. We're going to ignore Chessy Cat because this doesn't really do anything on its own. We're going to ignore the extenders for the moment. So there's 2 Dormouse, there's 2 White Rabbit, there's 2 Field Spell, there's Terraforming, and there's Gold Sark. Let us ignore all extenders for the moment and say 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So let's say there are 8 really good starters in our deck. The chance of us opening at least one of these is 69%. That's actually not a very high percent because it means that in 30-ish% of your games, you are not going to draw one of your pure starters. And your deck is not going to be very consistent, even if the ceiling of your deck is very high, if 30% of the time you're not even drawing the card that allows you to play. So there are 2 things to think of here. Obviously, Malice is a great deck that is very consistent, and that isn't because of the starter count. It's because of the combination between the starter count, which are very, very high quality starters that often work together because only a couple of them conflict on the normal, whereas others, like the Terraforming, Gold Sark, and Malice and Underground, will complement your normal and work as extenders even if you didn't use them as your only starter. But you also have your actual high quality extenders. So cards like March Hare, Backup at Ignister, and Wizard at Ignister, and also the Bystials, which are maybe slightly less popular than they were before. These cards work very well with all of your other starters, and also cards that aren't even really starters or extenders. So Chessy Cat goes from being just a name, which is only useful because you can link up into other cards or use its Banish to Draw effect, to a card that is actually full combo if you have a single other extender in combination with it. So realistically, what we're looking at here isn't just that we have a 70-ish% chance of seeing one of our pure starters in every hand. We have 20 cards here that we want to see in combinations with each other. And very few of these are bad to draw together. Unless we are drawing multiple normal summons, we actually are totally fine with seeing almost any of these cards together. So if we have 20 of these cards, just for the sake of simplicity, let's say that we're looking at these 20 cards and we want to look at the probability of accessing these cards. So we will draw one or more of these 20 cards 97-98% of the time. Now obviously a bunch of these cards like Magnemite or Druis Worm don't actually do anything on their own. So we want to see multiple cards in the same hand. So instead, let's take a look at the chance of us drawing at least 2 of those 20 cards in a given hand. So now this is 83%, which is a pretty decent percentage. So One number that's kind of important is the 80% number. There are certain decks like Mermail that will sit around an 80-ish% chance of seeing some type of starter to be able to play. And that means that in, 1 out of 5 of your games, you're not going to have a way to play. But in this deck, in Malice, it's actually that in 83%, we have multiple ways to play, or we at least have an extender. We have something that turns something that normally wouldn't be playable into full combo, or we have something that is full combo on its own, able to play through even more interactions because we have drawn it in combination. Now, if we change this to, instead of drawing at least 2 of these 20 cards here, to drawing at least 3 of these 20 cards, that 83% is going to drop to 50%. So it means that in half of all of our games, we are going to see 3 of these starter extender type cards. Now, this is where it's very important to think about your deck building. So a typical hand, a statistically normal hand, is going to be 2 or 3 of these cards, and there will even be hands where we are going to draw 4 of these cards and only a single other card in our deck. Now that's only 17% of the time, so that's not really a statistically normal type of hand, but drawing 3 starter extenders or 2 starter extenders is going to be almost every single hand we draw. And so when you deck build, if you have half of your deck in a 40 card deck being starter extenders, it means that you're going to draw 2 or 3 of these cards in basically every hand. So that's a very important thing, or kind of like rule of thumb or point of reference to take into consideration when you're thinking about deck building. Now I have a list of the important numbers here to keep in mind as I go over the rest of these. So I also want to talk briefly about the number 1. So let's look at the chance of you drawing just a single card. Imagine, for example, that you're looking at the chance of drawing talent, or you're thinking about whether or not you should play around your opponent's talent. So the chance of you drawing a card that is a 1 of in a 40 card deck is 12.5% of the time. Now, if you played back in the day with Gamma and Driver or Garnet for Brilliant Fusion, you'll be very, very familiar with this number. So this isn't actually as low a number as you might have thought, because it means in 1 out of 10 of your games, you should expect that you are going to draw this card. So if you're playing a larger event with a bunch of rounds, you are going to draw your bricks basically every single time, even if you're only playing a single brick. Here's why I'd like to make a comparison between Malice and White Forest and show you why Malice is a better deck in principle than White Forest, and just necessarily by design will remain that way unless there are further modifications by the ban list or new cards introduced into the card pool. So, the starter extender type cards are generally very high quality. This is not a Malice video, so I'm not going to go over that in detail, but just take my word for this if you don't already believe that. The starter extender cards in this deck are very high quality. The non-engine choices you can make in your deck should also be high quality, and you typically have more freedom in which non-engine you want to play. So cards like Foolos, Impulse, Droll, etc. are all very strong cards. Now, if we look at the cards that are kind of like engine requirements, so we don't necessarily want to draw these cards, but we do want them to be a part of our deck because we want to search them or have them as some part of our combo. The number of cards that Malice has to play is also extremely low. So a lot of builds right now are only playing MTP07 in terms of the traps, and they're not on TB11 or GWC. Some builds are still playing 3, some builds are playing 2, some builds are playing 1. The point is, these cards are not mandatory. If we've seen success where people are playing 3 to 2 to 1 of the trap, it means that you can actually get away with playing lower engine requirements in Malice. And these engine requirements are stronger cards than most other decks' engine requirements. For example, MTP07 can be a type of a starter. Like if you summon White Rabbit as your only starter, you summon Rabbit, you set MTP07, you banish the Rabbit to get access to a hare, Rabbit comes back, you turn it into Lingaribo, you banish the Rabbit from grave, which you won't get back to summon the March Hare, and now you can go into Splash Mage, bring back March Hare, you have full combo, etc. So the point is that even if you search this card as part of your combo, not as like an end board piece, or you've hard drawn it, this actually is still useful. And this is quite unusual for Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Involves power creep, but generally engine requirements in other decks are not as useful to draw or to search in part of your combo compared to these cards. So most of the non-engine cards in the Malice deck are actually very strong, totally optional, up to you non-engine cards, and that makes Malice an excellent deck. Let's switch over to a second to White Forest and show you why a deck like this is worse in principle than Malice. So let's ignore starters and non-engine for a moment, and let's just look at cards that are kind of like engine requirements, you know, cards that we don't actually ever want to draw that are basically bricks, and then cards that sit in a gray zone between being decent to draw but actually you prefer something higher quality. So Hallowed Azumina is the perfect example of a brick. This card does nothing on its own if you draw it, but it is mandatory because it is your only way, unless you play Debtors, which is another conversation, to fuse into your Azamina stuff. And so you're searching this in part of every single basic White Forest combo that exists. You have to search this card to perform your fusion summon, and you often will use it twice in the same turn to fusion summon twice. So this card we don't want to draw, but we accept that it is a brick because it increases our ceiling so dramatically that it is worth playing this card. But what happens if we take a look at some of the other cards that maybe are not technically bricks, but maybe they trade very poorly into interactions, or we just would rather have a card that was a better quality? Deception of the Sinful Spoils is a card that can tribute a monster from your hand or field to add an Azamina card from your deck to your hand. So oftentimes you'll be searching Hallowed Azamina to perform your fusion. So we know that Deception is a card that is needed. You have to play this card at 1. The reason that people play this card at 1, just like with Hallowed, is because even though this is technically not a brick, it is an extremely inefficient card in that it both requires another card to be able to play, and it will trade very poorly with almost any interaction. If your opponent ashes this or detonator pops it or whatever, you've already tributed the monster from hand or field as cost, and so you're going to lose 2 cards instead of just 1 card if your opponent trades with you. So this is also a low quality card. If we look at cards like Philia Diabel, this card can add a Diabel monster from deck to your hand, or if only your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon it instead. So going second, this card is far stronger than going first, which means that this is not a high quality card. Curse of Diabel, similarly, is a very strong card in terms of the game plan and in terms of its ceiling. So if you control 2 or more Diabel monsters, you can send a monster you control to the graveyard, destroy all face-up cards your opponent controls. The requirements for this are far more steep than the requirements for the Malice Traps. Then, the other effect, if it's sent to the graveyard or banished from the hand or deck, you can add a Diabel spell or trap from your deck to your hand, except itself. This is part of the basic combo to get Philia Diabel to get either the White Witch or the Vengeance, which is your main boss monster post-Alliance Insight. So as we can see, this is a strong card, it's a necessary part of our game plan, but it's not as high quality as we would like. You know, the Malice cards, generally speaking, are better than this because they either work on their own or they feel much nicer to use in combination with each other. Other cards that we have here are, you don't have to play this, but just for example, in a typical list, you may be mating Sinful Spoils of Subversion, which is a card that's obviously very strong going second, and doesn't really do anything going first aside from just being fodder or a Sinful Spoils name. Obviously, that's still useful, but it's not the highest quality you could get in Yu-Gi-Oh! If you're playing an actual great deck. For example, if you were playing a deck like Mitsurugi, this card is one of the most incredible cards that's ever been printed because all you have to do is reveal it to special summon a Mitsurugi monster from your deck and then tribute a monster you control. And you contribute the same monster you bring out from your deck, and because the Mitsurugi monsters will get their effect on tribute, then they will still resolve. It allows you to dodge stuff like, Imperm, Veiler, etc., etc. So this type of card, you don't even lose itself when you're searching. Like if you were to activate Tails, you're losing the Tails to search for the thing that the Tails is getting you. But the Habakiri stays in your hand and then is a useful body that you're going to summon or tribute for cost or whatever. So this is an example of an extremely high value type of card, and it's not the type of card that we typically have in White Forest. We have cards that gain value because of interactions with other cards, which means that the baseline for us to be able to play is higher. The requirements are steeper. So this is how you can tell that a deck like White Forest is naturally not as good just in terms of card economy and your likelihood of drawing a statistically useful hand like you would in Malice. Okay, so let's go over a couple of other numbers here. So let's talk about the number 5. The number 5 was popularized, I think, by Jesse Cotton. So this is to do with normal summons. If you look in your deck, if you have 3 normal summons in your entire deck, the chance of you drawing at least one of them is 33%. Okay, it's the same as with any other 3 of. If you have 5 normal summons in your deck, the chance of you drawing it is about 50%. So in half of your hands, you're going to see a normal summon. Now imagine that you really need your normal summon to play, and so you think that just seeing a normal summon in half of your hands is simply not enough, and so you need to play more than 5. If you were playing, let's say, 10 normal summons, this number will skyrocket to 78%, almost 80% chance that if you play 10 normal summons, you're going to open at least one of them. And that's obviously very important for a deck that would revolve around a specific normal summon, but because you cannot normal summon twice, usually, you don't actually want to clog on normals. So let's go back to 3 normals, and let's look at, instead of the chance of you drawing just one of them, the chance of you drawing 2 of them. It's 3.6%. So you don't even have to take into consideration a percentage as small as this in terms of if you only have 1 normal in your deck. So if you were playing, Sylvie as your only normal, the chance of you drawing 2 of this is so low that you just ignore it. Obviously it will happen once in a long while, but it's not going to happen often enough. If you were playing 5 normal summons, for example, the double Esteller and the triple Sylvie, the chance of you drawing 2 of them goes up to 11%. So this is roughly the same chance as drawing, your 1 of brick like your Driver or your Garnet. If you go up to playing 10 normal summons, then the chance of you opening doubles goes up to 36%. So that means that in close to 40%, that's not even that far off of half of all of your games, you're going to be drawing 2 normals, so 1 card in your hand is going to be a brick. So this type of number or usage of the probability calculator is very useful for letting you know how many cards is too many cards and how many is an acceptable number. So that's why the number 5 is kind of popular. The chance of you drawing doubles goes up more than the chance of you seeing the single if you're talking about 5 normals as opposed to a higher number of normals. Okay, so the last things I wanted to talk about are deck sizes and then non-engine count. So let's bring back up Malice for a second here. So here we have, let's say, 15, let's say that we have 15 hand traps here for a second. Let's ignore the call by and the talent, or maybe the fact that we could cut the GWC and we could just have the MTP07 and the Malice in the Mirror as our engine requirements, and we could have like other non-engine cards here. Let's just say for a second, for the sake of argument, that we have 15 non-engine cards here. So we have the Impulse, we have Imperm, we have Fulos, we have Droll, we have Ash, okay? 15 cards. So the chance of us in a 40 card deck drawing at least 1 hand trap is 92%. So almost every single hand, we're going to see at least 1 of those cards. In 63% of our hands, we're going to see at least 2 of those cards. And then in 26% of the time, we're going to see at least 3 of those cards. So actually drawing 2 or 3 is pretty normal, 2 hand traps. Drawing 1 hand trap and only engine is pretty unusual. But usually most hands, we're going to draw 2 or 3 hand traps, and that's pretty decent. So the number of hand traps you should be playing is usually dictated by the format. Like, should you be on breakers? Should you be on hand traps? What type of hand traps? Are you just on 9 Charmies and no other hand traps or whatever? Is usually determined by the format, but the number that you have to play is based on how many are acceptable to draw. So if you're in a format where you want to draw as many low impact hand traps as possible, stuff like Ash Blossom, Imperm, Veiler, Ghost Mourner, Ghost Bell, those type of things that you're losing the card to do something, and it usually trades with 1 card from your opponent, like back in the Snake Eye format, you need to play a very high number of those cards to guarantee that you're going to see preferably 3, but at least 2 of those in every hand. So going from something like 15 hand traps to 18 hand traps, we will go from just 26% of the time we'll see at least 3 to, put this at 18, to 40% of the time. So we have a pretty substantial change in us drawing 3 non-engine cards, and we only really need 2 engine cards to be able to play. So again, that's kind of like how Snake Eye format was, where you just wanted to draw like a Wanted or a Witch or an original, or your Snake Eye Ash, one of the many starters that Snake Eyes had access to back in the day, before the dark times. And so the difference between 15 and 18 was pretty substantial, and you probably should have played 18 in a lot of those decks. Some decks even played 20. Okay, so the last thing I want to do so that I don't make this video too long is I just want to talk about deck size. So let's look at Malice real quick here. Actually, no, let's look at White Forest. Let's look at White Forest. So let's look at just starters, just pure starters here for the moment, and we're going to ignore certain things like the Dark Lock on a field spell, or the exact difference between like what one starter loses to versus what another loses to. And let's just say we have LZ, we have field spell, we have a Stellar, and we have Sylvie. Let's just say that these are our only starters. So 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Let's say that we have 11 starters, okay? In a 40 card deck, if we have 11 starters, the chance of us seeing at least one of those is 82%. This is not a very high percentage, because it means in 20% of your games, you're not going to draw a single starter. So you need to have other ways to play, and a good deck is going to have multiple ways to play. Now, obviously, you can say that cards like D-Bell's the White Witch, or Foolish Burial Goods, or even Tails in combination with other things, or, possibly Witch and Tails or other things can get you into different ways to play, or like the Chorozo line and that type of stuff. But in terms of actual good starters, we don't have a very high number of those starters. If we were playing a 40 card deck, it would be 82% of the time that we would see one of these starters. Now let us look at if we were playing a 50 card deck. Instead of 82% of the time we see a starter, it goes to 72%. And if we go to a 60 card deck, it drops to 65%. Now, how big of a difference do you think that is? Maybe some people debate it one way or the next, but actually The difference is not as big as I think a lot of people would suspect, because if you are at 82% in a 40 card deck and you go to, let's say, 45, that 82 dropping to 77 is almost irrelevant just in terms of you seeing one starter. So if all you cared about was drawing a single starter, you don't have to worry too much about going from 40 to 45. But it starts to become more noticeable when you go from 40, so we're at 82%, to 50, where we're going to drop to 72%. So that's a 10% difference. So that means that there's one more game in every 10 games we are not going to see one of those starters. And that could be the difference between we just straight up lose the game, and if we're playing like a longer tournament, that could be the difference between, you know, being able to top or not. And so this is like a pretty important number. Now, obviously, there are ways of boosting your starters, like playing more a Stellar or playing more Tales of the White Forest in a deck that easily has access to spellcasters, and you can boost your starter count. But where the math really changes very dramatically and drops off a cliff is when you look at the chance of you drawing multiples of the thing that you want to draw. So let's look at our engine pieces here, and let's also just say, for the sake of argument, that we want to draw two of these 20 cards. Let's just say, okay, just for the sake of argument, we want to draw 2 of these 20 cards in a 45 card deck or in a 40 card deck. So if we started a 40 card deck, okay, and we have 20 cards, we want to draw multiple of those cards, okay? The chance of us drawing at least 2 of those starts at 82%, and if we go up to 60, it drops to 54%. That's a huge difference. If you are going from 40, where that chance would be 82%, to something like 50, that drops to 67%. If you go to 55, that's dropping to 60%. If you go to 60 cards in your deck, it drops to 54%. So while the chance of you drawing just a single starter doesn't actually change that much when you're going from 40 to 45 or even 50 and sometimes even higher, like if you have more starters, it's not that big of a change. The chance of you drawing multiples, so combinations of those, will radically decrease. And so that's why in a deck like White Forest, you either have to build a deck closer to 40 or 45, and you're trying to draw multiple engine pieces every hand, and that's your statistically most likely hand to draw, or you're going to play a 60 card list where you're like, I'm totally fine with not drawing multiple engine cards, I just need to draw one, because I'm going to have enough other stuff in my 60 card deck that compensates and protects for the fact that I only have one engine card. So you may be playing Fiendsmith, you could be playing Horus, you could be playing the Millennium Package, you could be playing whatever, things that will soak interactions from your opponent and not really affect the chance of you drawing a single starter. Okay, that is all for this video. I hope that you learned something. If you want to hear more, kind of more like abstract Yu-Gi-Oh theory, please let me know. If you want to join the Discord, feel free to join there and at me. Don't private message me because I don't see those, but you can at me if you are in the Discord on whatever channel, and thanks for watching.